I am back from my honeymoon, and that means I am back into content for DLF. So 11 weeks into the season, let's talk about where these rookie wide receivers are heading, where they are trending. And let's start at the bottom, right? The guys we'll call the probably dead tier for in terms of Dynasty. And at the very bottom of that list is Javon Baker. He's on pace for 0 yards. He has a 0% target share. He's running 1% of routes. In other words, Javon Baker is irrelevant. He's a day 3 wide receiver, and we like the landing spot, but it has not materialized. He does not matter for fantasy, and he will not matter for Dynasty. A slight notch above him, Malachi Corley. Honestly, again, got day 2 draft capital. People were excited, felt like a dynamic playmaker. He can't get on the field. Running 7% of routes. Under a 2% target share. On pace for 39 receiving yards. And he had the fumble, out of the back of the end zone that probably hurt his chances of earning more work. But Malachi Corley, also dead for Dynasty. Next up, this one hurts. This one hurts me physically, I think. Jalen Polk. I really like Jalen Polk coming out. And the landing spot was good. He had a clear path to opportunity. He was drafted in the 2nd round. He had a solid reception perception profile coming out. And his rookie year has gone about as bad as it possibly could, given all the other factors that seem to line up for at least a semi-productive rookie season. On pace for under 200 yards, running 60% of routes only, which just isn't high enough given the talent he's dealing with, and under a 10% target share. Everything has gone wrong for Jalen Polk. He's probably dead. If you can get out on Jalen Polk for a future 3rd, I get like the sunk cost here, but I'd take the 3rd. Jalen Polk is not it, unfortunately, and next season they're probably going to get more talent in. Maybe T. Higgins comes over from Cincy and just kind of relegates everybody else. So Jalen Polk, unfortunately, dead for fantasy. The next one here, he falls into the tier of dead or probably dead because of the peripherals and the production are bad. But there's a little bit of an outside circumstance we have to consider, and I'm talking about Jermaine Burton. And look, the outside circumstance is, like I just mentioned, T. Higgins could leave and open up a role here. But the thing is with Jermaine Burton, when he's been on the field, it hasn't been good. It hasn't been productive, right? His target rate when he is running routes, 16%. He has a 4% target share, on pace for about 200 yards receiving. And yes, he is blocked where his actual playing spot would be, but still, it is really tough to be all that excited if you've watched him. It just feels like a slog right now in his rookie season. Holding him, I fully understand. I probably would do it myself because there's going to be a value bump next season. The dangerous part there is betting on situation. They could draft a wide receiver again, higher than he was taken in the 3rd and relegate him further. So there is risk with Jermaine Burton, obviously, but the early returns have been underwhelming for what seemed like a pretty good player coming out of college. After Jermaine Burton, we have Luke McCaffrey. I think Addison and I were both really, really out. Really poor reception perception profile. Coming into a relatively weak wide receiver room aside from Terry McLaurin. And look, he can't get on the field. He's running less than 50% of routes. And when he is out there, he's not earning targets with a 10.8% target rate. On pace for 207 yards receiving. Luke McCaffrey just doesn't have it in his rookie year, at least. And this is about as bad a rookie year as you could have. I mean, outside of the guys below him, obviously. But the day 2 draft capital is not something I'm going to bank on, or I'm not really going to reference moving forward because, look, opportunity was in front of him. He has done nothing with it. Long term, the prospects are not looking good for Luke McCaffrey. And the last player in this tier of probably dead is Jalen McMillan. Jalen McMillan came into a very busy wide receiver room. I had low expectations just because of the situation. And then that situation really got, pretty clear about halfway through the season. And Jalen McMillan has just not been a good wide receiver when thrust into action, when forced to be potentially a guy or the guy. He can't do it. 13% target rate, 10% target share, running 73% routes. So he's on the field. He's out there. And he's just not doing anything with those routes. That's the biggest problem. The other guys are struggling to get on the field, which is bad. It's even worse when you're on the field and you're not doing anything with that opportunity, right? He's averaging under 5 points per game, on pace for 310 yards. Jalen McMillan is just proving to not really be all that good. If anything, with Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan both struggling this much, it looks like Michael Penix might be one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. I mean, he turned two guys that are really irrelevant into productive players and boosted their draft stock. I think that speaks more to how good Michael Penix might be, more so than how bad Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk actually are. Now, moving one step up the board from probably dead to a tiny, tiny glimmer of hope, we can call it. I don't know if that's a good tier name, but that's what it is. We'll start with Troy Franklin. Yes, he gets day 3 draft capital. Addison and I liked him a lot more coming out of college. And admittedly, he's only on pace for 270 yards. That's not great, right? That's worse than Jalen McMillan, who I just shit on, basically. But he at least has one signal that is at least semi-encouraging, right? With Jalen McMillan, he has a 13% target rate. That's abysmal. Troy Franklin, while only running 44% of routes, has a 21.8% target rate. So when he's out there, he is at least seeing the ball come his way. That's led to a 10% target share. Now, again, compare that to Jalen McMillan, running 73% of routes, 10% target share. Troy Franklin, 44% of routes, 10% target share. If that ticks up or continues to move up throughout this season, Troy Franklin could inch much closer to that 500-yard mark, that benchmark that we want to see guys hit. It's not a guarantee, and most likely, you're not going to get much from Troy Franklin during his career for fantasy, at least in the early seasons. But there is a tiny, tiny glimmer of hope that maybe he turns it on in the second half with increased route participation that could sort of offset a really, really poor start to the year. The other wide receiver, there's only 2 in this tier. The other one is Adonai Mitchell. Now, running 40% of routes. That sucks. That is bad, right? Granted, he's alongside Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, and even Alec Pierce has been semi-relevant at times. He's been more relevant than I anticipated. He's on pace for 377 yards, so again, below our 500-yard mark by a wide margin. A 12% target share is not great. But you're probably thinking, why is he in this tier? Nothing here is really all that good. The 28% target rate is insane. 28.8% to be specific. Right now, he's a part-time wide receiver, and they're struggling to find a role for him, on every single down. They're not running a lot of 3 wide receiver sets because you have Anthony Richardson back under center. Even with Joe Flacco, they weren't running a ton of that. But when he does find a way on the field, when they are giving him an opportunity, he's open consistently. Adonai Mitchell's a guy I think by the end of the season is not in this tier. I think he's one tier up. I think he gets closer to that 500-yard mark, if not exceeding it by the end of the season. Because admittedly, I think he is one of the more talented wide receivers in the NFL. The route running is undeniable. You don't accidentally wake up with a 28% target rate. That comes because you're open when you're on the field. This offense just isn't geared to have 3 wide receivers or even 4 wide receivers be semi-fantasy relevant. It's not going to be built that way. So Adonai Mitchell has a lot working against him right now, but he's somebody I'm still holding out a little bit of hope on to see if he can find his way in the second half of the season. Now, after Adonai Mitchell, we go up one more tier. And these are the guys that have flashed. There has been flashes of potential. Xavier Legette is the first one here on my list. And the reason being, look, he's pulled in a 14.9% target share. That is solid. He's running just under 70% of routes. He's on pace for just under 500 yards. He has shown us that, look, there is talent here. He was a first-round draft pick for a reason. I do think he could slip further down this list. Admittedly, him and Adonai Mitchell could flip-flop in these rankings, and I wouldn't be all that surprised. Because admittedly, averaging 8 points per game is not great. Averaging under or being on pace for under 500 yards is not great, especially in a weak wide receiver room. Now, the one piece you can kind of play devil's advocate here is who the hell is he catching passes from, right? Bryce Young and Andy Dalton. Deontay Johnson was the true one there for a good while. He's gone now, so there's at least some more work that's available, but maybe that gets offset by Adam Thielen coming back. These are the pieces we're wrestling with. I don't think Legette is trending in the right direction, and that's what concerns me. Again, I fully anticipate moving him down a tier by the end of this season. And after him, and this is, I think, going to shock people, it's Xavier Worthy. And Xavier Worthy, he did not come into a perfect situation when he was drafted, right? Hollywood Brown was there. Rashee Rice was there. Obviously, we have Travis Kelce, Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco gets hurt. Rashee Rice goes down. Hollywood Brown gets hurt. Xavier Worthy had a runway open for him to be the guy, or at least show he could be close to the guy in Kansas City as a rookie, catching passes from Patrick Mahomes as the 1B. And he hasn't done that. Flat out hasn't done it, right? He's got alphaed by Juju before he got hurt. They go out, they trade for DeAndre Hopkins. They clearly right now do not view Xavier Worthy as a player that can be the number one target in an offense. And that's shown by the production. He's on pace for only 522 yards. He is in a near perfect situation and has been for several weeks, and he's just not doing a ton with it. Now, look, he still has a 15% target share. That's great. He's running just under 80% of routes, and the target rate is only 16.7%. He feels gimmicky. He feels gadgety. I get why people are still in on Xavier Worthy, but the early returns have been upsetting. Now, I still want him over everybody we've talked about previously, but I'm not that bullish on his future outcomes, right? Rashee Rice is going to come back next year. They maybe draft another wide receiver. They maybe sign somebody else in free agency. They maybe keep DeAndre Hopkins. There's a lot of things that are going to change in this situation, especially if Travis Kelce retires. But right now, again, with the clearest path he will probably have for the next couple of seasons, he's not doing a ton with it. He's going to develop and evolve, and maybe next year's a breakout. But right now, the early signals are a guy that is just not ready to be a lead wide receiver in the NFL. And the last player in this tier is Keon Coleman. Now, Keon Coleman, the first guy we've talked about that is actually on pace to have a good rookie year. On track for 788 yards, which is perfectly fine, right? 14% target share. You want that higher, obviously. Running just under 80% of the routes. That's solid. The bad news for him is he's probably going to trend the wrong direction. One, not only is he hurt, but two, they traded for Amari Cooper and brought him in. They're going to run very similar routes. They're going to play very similar roles in this offense. So I think Keon Coleman, that 788 when he gets back on the field, that is going to tick down. That pace is not going to keep up. And that could, kind of move Keon Coleman, I think, just down this tier. It feels like there's a really big gap between this tier and the next batch of guys that we're excited about. And getting into our final tier here, these are the guys we legitimately are excited about. The guys I'm excited about that I think are top 20 Dynasty wide receivers and tight ends moving forward, and players that I want on my rosters, guys that will be actively targeting in the offseason regardless of situation changes, because the talent is there. At the bottom of this tier, it is Rome Odunze. And look, Rome Odunze is not having a loud rookie season by any stretch, but he's on pace for over 800 yards. He's pulling in a 19.9% target share. And that is, look, he's trending in the right direction. The last 4 weeks, he's gone over 100, he's gone over 60, he's gone over 40. He has been a much, much more involved wide receiver. And that 19.9% target share is great for any rookie, let alone a rookie that is dealing with the competition that Rome Odunze is dealing with, right? You have DJ Moore, you have Keenan Allen, you have Cole Kmet, you have DeAndre Swift. It's a really, really busy offense, and he's still finding a way to be relevant, right? If we look at JSN last year in a very similar situation, he was sitting down around 16, 17%. Rome Odunze is trending in the right direction. He may, and I expect him to finish over 20% as a rookie, and that's phenomenal. Typically, we want to see about 17% to get, to be intrigued, to get excited. Over 20%, it puts you usually in special conversation and gives you a much higher long-term ceiling, just based on what the data says here. So maybe I could create a tiny tier, between him and some of the other guys above him. But I feel good about his long-term prospects, especially next season with Keenan Allen gone, DJ Moore a year older, and hopefully the Bears getting a coach and an offensive play caller that aren't absolute idiots. Now, after Rome Odunze, let's look at Lad McConkey. And I know Addison and I talked about him in our rookie redraft. And since then, I've risen on Lad McConkey because he's just gotten better and better. He's on pace for over 1,000 yards. He has a 23.7% target share, 24% target rate. Lad McConkey's good. He's just a damn good wide receiver. I understand, he came into a perfect situation. Clearly the only good wide receiver, or clearly the only relevant wide receiver on the roster, tied to Justin Herbert. But even then, there were things that people didn't like about the offensive play calling and the coaching. Lad McConkey has done away with all of that. He has proven, look, even when he gets competition next year, he has the ability to go over 1,000 yards and, catch 60 to 70 passes and be productive and score touchdowns and do the things you want. Lad McConkey is, I think, a top 20 Dynasty wide receiver at this point. I can't really justify moving him any lower. And as long as the injuries don't get him, which he seems to get hurt every game, but as long as those injuries don't really get him, Lad McConkey is set up for a fantastic career, and you got a steal at the end of your first rounds in rookie drafts. Let's turn our attention to Brian Thomas, and obviously Brian Thomas is fantastic, and I think Mac Jones starting is going to put a damper on his overall end of season numbers, but averaging over 13 points per game, on pace for just under 1,100 yards, pulling in a 20% target share with a 21.5% target rate, all good things. And look, the target rate is going to continue to tick up, I hope, over the next couple of weeks, because Gabe Davis is now out for the year. Obviously, Christian Kirk has been gone. It's really just Brian Thomas and Evan Ingram. So he may get inflated numbers in terms of peripherals by the end of this season. But make no mistake, even before all of the injuries took place, Brian Thomas was on track to have a phenomenal rookie year. Now, he may not be or find his way to become a top 5 wide receiver. And that's okay, but I think he's well on his way to a yearly top 12 player. And look, Brian Thomas was our wide receiver 3 or 4, depending on where you looked. And he's lived up to the hype. He's exceeded it. Brian Thomas is damn good. Now, after Brian Thomas, we obviously have Marvin Harrison Jr. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is not on pace for over 1,000 yards. It's been a little bit of tough sledding, but 22% target share, 23% target rate. He's going to be fine, right? Marvin Harrison, the route running still looks great. They're just getting on the same page with Kyler. And these things happen. In a vacuum, this is a great rookie year. This is exactly what we said on the rookie redraft a couple weeks back. But because we threw insane expectations, myself, Addison included, it feels like he's disappointing. Look, the peripherals are strong. They are exactly what you want. Obviously, you want more production here. No doubt about it. But Marvin Harrison is going to be good. That's not a question in my mind. So take it with a grain of salt here, right? Production has not been elite. Marvin Harrison will be elite by the end of his career. And after Marvin Harrison, I'm looking at Brock Bowers. He's not a wide receiver, but he needs to be talked about because Brock Bowers has a 26% target share. He's averaging just under 16 points per game, 15.9 to be exact. He's on pace for 1,200 yards receiving. All of this with Alex O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. Brock Bowers is the Dynasty tight end 1 by a mile. He is 2 tiers ahead of Trey McBride, who I think is probably next. He's the next best tight end for the next decade. There's not really much else we can say or add to that, other than if you got Brock Bowers, you are set for so long. He's not leaving a roster that I drafted him on, because why would I give up arguably the biggest positional advantage in fantasy for the next, again, like I said, probably 10 years. And to close us out, we have Malik Nabers. Now, the production has fallen a little bit, right? He's down to 17.4 points per game with a 36% target share, on pace for just under 1,300 yards. Malik Nabers he's a top 5 wide receiver right now in Dynasty. And the only question is going to be who ends up being his long-term quarterback. That's going to dictate his value. And even then, it really shouldn't change it all that much because he proved he can be elite with Daniel Jones. And if you can do that, your quarterback really doesn't matter in the end of things.